Well, thank you so much, Gabor Henry, for having us here. Um, it's kind of unfortunate because Max have given a very, very amazing presentation. So I have a bar to eat a bit. And but then I think what we're doing at GraphGeeks is it's kind of interesting. So I think this might actually be very useful to everyone as well. Now, I'll be presenting about the GraphGeek organization, and then one of the projects that we're also working on is called graphfaker. Um, right, so this is the layout. So I'll talk about GraphGeeks, then graphfaker, and then finally conclusions. Now, intro into GraphGeeks. So it's um, it's kind of interesting how GraphGeeks started. I think 2023, while I was doing my master's in Lisbon, Portugal, I that was the first time I started working. Like I knew anything about graph for my master's program. It was a really interesting course, and from that day onward, I was like, this is what I want to do. And probably because I have a geospatial background, and one of the best part of geospatial was working with vector data like network analysis, on finding shortest paths, but I've never really thought about it from a graph perspective. So when I learned about that, I was like, okay, this is actually what I'm interested in, graphs. And I sent an email to Amy, who I found online, and she just started GraphGeeks. And then we started talking, and then we decided to say, okay, let's build this community. And then we decided to start GraphGeeks. And then one of the things I also noticed when I was going through this process of learning graph was the fact that there's a lot of community, but the communities are always vendor specific. And it was a problem because we needed something that people can come in, share ideas, work on projects, learn together, grow, and also just do things that's interesting. So that was one thing that I couldn't find. And it was very important because Amy herself was also thinking in the same light. So we decided to come in together and work on something which is GraphGeeks. Now, so right now we're a team of two, Amy and myself. Amy is doing most of the day-to-day operation. I am helping out with trying to like get things more interesting as compared to development, innovation, and also seeing how we can be able to like bridge the gap from just having people talk about amazing things to start doing good contribution to the graph community. Now, since January 2024, we've actually had some interesting stats. And one of the things is that our Discord community is growing. We have over 880 people on Discord. The LinkedIn followers also growing for 1 year and 6 months worth of work. And our mailing list is increasing as well. We're publishing quite a number of videos with some really interesting traction. And then when it comes to the GraphGeeks Lab, which is where we're thinking about doing more interesting projects, we currently have three. One of them is just like an awesome graph universe, which the idea right now is to be able to like anything you're working on, people can actually find that. The other one is career path for a graph engineer, which is currently still in the work. But then one of them as well is the graphfaker, which I'm going to talk about later. But other than that, the other thing that we try to do as well is training. Just like what Mark said, it's everything in graph is growing and it's getting better. But one of the things that we also realize that we need to be able to like create that engagement. We need to share more information about graphs, and then not necessarily just any information, but a more neutral information. Because one of the biggest players are always very about, oh, you do graph and then you move it into my database and the likes. So the question we're trying to solve is, can we work collaboratively with different people in the community to come up with a more neutral approach to graphs? And which is also one of the reasons why we are very focused on the training. And then even in doing so, we've also really gotten some really interesting things like the Agentic AI Summit, where we work with 4 community members, myself, Amy, and some other really amazing people to be able to deliver a workshop on GraphRag. And there's also another conference, which is the ODSC, that GraphGeeks is going to also be talking about graph. And also we also have webinars as well. Now, the graphical library. Now, one of the biggest challenge I had while I was working with graph data was the tedious, like how difficult it is to like start working with graph data. So I come from a tabular way of representation of data. And then interesting enough, just like how I was also learning languages like Portuguese, I realized that even when I'm working on graph data, I think in tabular. Like, so when I do my nodes and edges, I'm also thinking about how do I represent this in table, which means that I also have a long way to go when it comes to representing data in my head and in the way I interact and process it in a graph schema. But that's also one of the biggest challenges we have from a data science perspective, where when you're working with graph, the first thing you have to think about is the schema, is try to put this data into edges and nodes. And then we were thinking, okay, is it possible for us to have something like Faker, which is a library that generates records for whatever you're trying to do, like whether it's a phone number, names, and entities. So, which is where we start thinking about this. And the goal as well was to make it as realistic as possible, not just something random, which is one of our data set is very random, which is from the Faker database. But our goal as well was that, okay, it's possible for us to make this as easy as possible, where people can just import GraphFaker and then you can get started and start exploring with any data, any algorithm of your choice. So that's one of the things we're trying to solve. So our solution is GraphFaker. I think from my interest in Faker, and then we also have reward graph from flight graphs from the BTS, which is the Bureau Transportation System. And I think the goal for us is just to elevate that pain or eliminate that pain for prototyping and using graphs. So the GraphFaker is the source is from Fakers, and so Faker is a Python library. It's a very popular one, over 20K stars. And what we try to do right now is to build this random social graphs with people, places, organization, events, products. And for you to use it, you just have to do from GraphFaker, import GraphFaker, and then you specify the source, Faker, and then the number of nodes and edges, and it should be able to provide a graph like this. Now, we also wanted to do something a little bit more interesting, which is like, can we also go through the pain of getting flight data set from BTS, which is a very known data set. I use this when I was also learning machine learning using from a predictive method. But the interesting thing as well is that the data is available, but the process of getting data also requires you to understand how to go about that. So we decided to, okay, it's possible to fetch this, build this data, and also be able to build it as a network. So you can be able to like work on various graph algorithm or experiment using graphs. And it's similar to working with Faker. So what you just have to do is specify the source, which is flights. Then you have the year. Maybe you were looking at 2025, different years. And then interesting enough, it takes the processing time for building the graph is about 17 seconds. But ingesting it as well, because depending on your internet, will probably take about 20 seconds because you're downloading this from a CSV file and then you unpacked it, and then finally it's automatically building all the necessary graph networks. Now, because of GraphRags and the interest in unstructured data, we decided to also include wiki pages, so where people can also get started with exploring unstructured data processing for a graph program. And one thing I was able to do as well is, so you get this is a bar model, you can be able to like identify entities. So it's like you can be able to get this, use it from your own command line without necessarily having to find data set. So I think our goal has always been to help solve the issue of getting graph data or working with any graph data. But then the issue we're also experiencing right now is the fact that exporting this to other languages, which is one of the reasons why the graph AR was really interesting to me as well, is becoming a little bit of pain. One of the biggest contention is that we need to get this into CSV and then move it to, like, let's say graph engine, or probably just pick one favorite or just pick one graph engine like Kuzu or PGL, and then just support that so that you can be able to like get this to the next level. So I think that's something that we're also thinking about. So what's next for us is it's thinking about contribution, reviews, and feedback. And then we also want to grow the number of data sets that's available, which is also the reason why I was really excited about the project you're doing, which I think that, okay, it might be very useful for us to start thinking about ways to provide useful data and graph for people to be able to make use of. Now, conclusion. So we at GraphGeeks, we are also thinking about some really exciting things, and which is like you can join us through the Discord channel. But one of the things we're also thinking about is how can we get more people involved? So one of the interesting things that we have is that graph frames, most of your technical discussion is currently being done in Discord, and which is being led by Russell. So he has a subgraph within the GraphGeeks where they're having discussion about future release and everything. And I think that's also something that we're really excited about. And then we also want to see how we can get more communities to come on board. So we're very lenient and very open to the transparency. So what we do is that we set up a small channel, like a channel with the right ownership, where, let's say, for instance, if you grab AR, if you don't have a community, you're going to be leading it, you're going to be in charge of all conversation. And also, we also support like integrating directly to GitLab or GitHub so you can get issues, reviews, and everything. So we provide that level of autonomy to people if you're trying to like use the GraphGeeks community. But we also know that sometimes this project grows larger. So if you also want to move to something else, we're also very encouraging that. We also encourage that. But I think for us specifically, we're thinking about, okay, is it possible to like set up that place where people can talk more about graphs? And then the other thing as well is that we are interested so much about study groups. It's something that a lot of people have shown interest, and we have some going on. But the more study group we have, the more we're thinking that it might be very interesting to have people talking about the latest in GraphGeeks. Now, so the other thing that we're also thinking about doing specifically next year is the outreach to the academic community. One of the things we noticed as well is that with 800 people, most of them, 95% are from the industry. So we want to be able to like reach out to more academics or academian. And because we believe that when the GraphGeeks community and the people from the industry, the academians, they're talking together, we should be able to do some really interesting things and work on more interesting tools. And then also, we're also looking at collaboration. One of our collaboration we're also looking into right now is with the LDBC, who is currently one of the only community that is also striving for that neutrality that we are strongly for. So I think that's one thing. And then the other thing as well is trainings. We want to be able to set up more engagement like similar to this. We don't know how to go about that, but it's something that we've definitely envisioned because the ones that we see are always vendor specific. And because of that, there's always that friction where people don't necessarily want to go because it seems like you are actually going to hear more about this particular vendor. So we're asking if it's possible for us to also like do more of that. And I think that's basically, I think right now we're also thinking more about ideas and also thinking about okay, how we can make this better. And yeah, I think thank you. And yeah, this is the links to join or yeah, just get to know more about GraphGeeks.